All right, we're going to go ahead and do lesson 20 in heritage studies today. And I'm sorry about the background noise. I've moved my computer and it's a little bit more noisy where I've moved it, and I apologize for that, but that's just part of homeschooling. All right, let's look at page 64 in your reader book. We're going to be talking about cattle trails and cow towns today. We talked about cattle drives and cattle brands yesterday. We talked about the railroad the day before. So we're talking about cattle trails and cow towns. Now, before we start on page 64, I want you to think back from yesterday and the cowboys. What were some of the skills that a cowboy needed in order to be on a cattle drive or to be a cowboy? He needed to be good with horses. He needed to be strong. He needed to be able to endure long, hot days and cool nights or chilly nights. He had to be good with a rope. He had to know lots of things. And what was the purpose of the ranchers using cattle brands? Made it harder for thieves to steal their cows because it had their mark on them, and it was easy to be able to tell whose cattle belonged to who, because sometimes you've got cows or cattle or longhorns that look exactly the same, and so a brand on there would help them know who belonged to who. All right, so look at the top of page 64. The title is Cattle Trails and Cow Towns, and on page 65 we've got some real pictures of some marshals, or what we would call, I guess, a sheriff, an overseer in each of these little cow towns that we're going to talk about. And then on page 66, we've got a picture of a revolver. In 1836, the Colt revolver was invented, and they were using that. And then there's a real picture of a man named Wild Bill Hickok, which I'm sure you've heard of him before. All right, let's look at the top of page 64. Now, look at that map there at the bottom of page 64. Now, you've got the red is called the Chisholm Trail. That went from San Antonio up through Oklahoma, up into Kansas to, I can barely read that, Ellisworth, Kansas, and Abilene, Kansas. Then you have the Yellow Trail that went from San Angelo, Texas, up to Cheyenne, Wyoming. It went through Colorado and New Mexico territory. And then you have the green one, which was called the Western Trail, and that went from Banders, Texas, all the way up into Nebraska. So those were some long trails that they took those cattle on. All right, so let's go ahead and I want you to follow along with me. I'm going to read on pages 64, 65, and 66. And we're going to be learning about these cattle trails and these cow towns. I want you to be listening for the names and the reasons why they had marshals in these towns. Okay? And then a little bit about the trails. I want you to be able to tell me about those. All right, ready? Here, let's read the top of page 64. At first, cattle were taken mainly to towns in Missouri to meet the railroad. But settlers in Oklahoma and Missouri didn't like the longhorns coming through their lands. The settlers were trying to raise cattle of their own. The longhorns often carried ticks, and these ticks caused a fever in the settlers' cattle. A cattle buyer named Joseph McCoy had an idea. He set up a cattle shipping yard in the small town of Abilene, Kansas. Since the railroad had made its way west, Abilene was now located by the railroad. Many cowboys were glad to be able to bring their cattle to a town farther west. The route to Abilene was straight north from Texas. There was no danger of harm to the settlers' cattle. Cowboys used the same trails for cattle drives again and again. The trail used to go to Abilene was called the Chisholm Trail. This trail was named after a trader, Jesse Chisholm. He had used the trail to carry goods to his trading post. For many years, the Chisholm Trail was the most popular cattle trail. Another trail, the Goodnight Loving Trail, went even farther west. Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving created this trail as a way to get the cattle to Wyoming and to Colorado and Wyoming. As the cattle trade grew, several more Kansas railroad towns were used as shipping points. Abilene, Wichita, Ellsworth, and Dodge City were some of the best-known cow towns. So those were some of the best-known cow towns. And the names of these trails were named after those who blazed through first, those who went through those first. And he did this. Why did they have to even make these certain trails? Why did they follow these same things? The people that lived in the other towns in Oklahoma and Kansas, they got tired of the wild cattle just going through their land and making messes and wreaking havoc, and they were like, no, wait a minute. So they make these certain trails, almost like a highway for cattle. They could go through and they wouldn't bother these people's lands anymore. Look at page 65. Boy, these are some serious looking dudes right here, aren't they? Okay, let's read about this and see if we might find out a little bit about what these guys did. Find out a little bit about their lives. Most cow towns had no local government to make laws. Without laws, cow towns quickly became some of the roughest towns in the West. Cowboys were paid at the end of a cattle drive. A cow town provided many ways for a cowboy to spend his money. Businesses such as gun shops, boot sellers, and general stores did well in cattle towns, but there were also many ways to spend money on things that were not good or wise. Dance halls and saloons where cowboys would gamble and drink whiskey moved into cow towns. These towns became places of much temptation or evil for young cowboys. Many cow towns hired lawmen to help keep order. Tom Smith was one of the first lawmen or marshals of Abilene. He believed in using his hands as his weapon more often than his guns. Athletic and fearless, he stood up to the toughest men in town. He was killed while on duty, but he's still remembered as a lawman who commanded respect. Bob Tillman was the marshal of Dodge City for 2 years. Like Smith, he rarely used his guns unless he had to. He was known for his honesty and courage. He later worked as a lawman in Oklahoma, where he helped arrest 2 dangerous outlaws. All right, what made those cow towns some of the roughest towns in the West? They didn't have any laws. They had no government or any laws or anybody to do anything. What kinds of businesses did well in the cow towns? Gun shops, boot sellers, general stores. They sold different things. Why do you think those stores did so well? They sold the things the cowboys needed, right? Yeah. What were some of the temptations, though, in the cow towns? Drinking and gambling, their money, dance halls, things like that. And there was a lot of temptations for these young men. Who was one of the first lawmen in Abilene? Tom Smith, one of the first. Tom Smith was remembered with respect. He stood up tall and straight to some of the toughest dudes that came in. Maybe he was like Pecos Bill. Who knows? Why do you think that they wanted to use their hands more than their guns, these lawmen? They didn't want to kill anybody, did they? They didn't like death and violence. They wanted to end things right. But when worse come to worse and push come to shove, they would, right? Exactly. And they were known for their honesty. Look at the next page. Page 66. There's a revolver and Wild Bill Hickok. All right, let's read this page, and I want you to listen to Wild Bill Hickok and why he's so famous. Not every lawman had the kind of character that everyone admired. Wild Bill Hickok was probably the most famous lawman of the West. He was the marshal of Abilene after Tom Smith. Hickok was a gambler who spent much of his time in saloons, but he was also an expert shooter and quick to deal with trouble. Feared by many and hated by some, he died of a gunshot wound. By the late 1800s, many cow towns had become calmer places. For the most part, large cattle drives had ended. More and more settlers planted crops and put up fences. Open land for driving cattle was hard to find. Railroads were more common and easier to reach. More ranchers and cowboys took care of cattle on privately owned land. But Americans have not forgotten the days of the cowboys. Some of the cow towns, such as Wichita and Dodge City, are large cities in the state of Kansas today. And the cowboy himself is a symbol of the spirit of the adventure in America's Old West. So, Wild Bill Hickok was one of the most famous lawmen, but why was his character not really admired? He was a gambler and he spent a lot of time in the saloons. But what he did do well was shoot. And he also dealt with trouble when it happened. Exactly. All right, and there's that gun there, that Colt revolver is one of the guns that a lawman may have used in those days. What things helped those cow towns become calmer? People started buying up land and keeping the cattle at their own place and just dealing with them there. The cattle drives couldn't take, there was no free land to just drive the cattle through anymore because everybody owned land. What is the cowboy a symbol of today? The spirit of adventure in America's Old West. If you ever hear of the Old West, I always say it's called the cowboy days. My mom used to say, well, back in the cowboy days, well, she didn't live in the cowboy days, but she liked learning about the cowboy days, and she just called them the cowboy days, and so that's what I call them. So if I ever say the cowboy days, I'm referring to the Old West. All right, let's look in our book on pages 28 and 29. Now, page 29 is a study guide page, and you're going to do that page for a grade, and you can use your book. Go back and look in your book, and you do that. Make sure, though, on numbers 7 through 11, it says if it's true, write true. But if it's false, you don't write false. You write the correct word that would make it true. Okay? All right, look at page 28 on this map. All right, these are the cattle trails. Now, you live in San Angelo, Texas. Can you find San Angelo, Texas? It's right at the end of the yellow mark. Okay, you and your family are going on a road trip to visit your grandparents in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Then you will visit your uncle, aunt, and cousins in Topeka, Kansas. Now, number 1, what cattle trail begins in your hometown? Got to look at the key. The Good Night Loving Trail. Okay, so fill in the blank there on number 1. That's the Good Night Loving Trail that begins in your hometown. All right. Now, in what direction will your family travel to get on Interstate 20 if you follow the trail? You got to go which direction? West. You'll have to go west to get on I-20. So fill in west. Okay. Look at the very bottom of your map on the right-hand side in the corner. Do you see where it says Corpus Christi? Right next to there is a yellow circle with N, E, S, and W. That's called a compass rose. Now that shows us which direction on the map things are. Everything up is north, everything to the right is east, everything down is south, and everything to the left is west. And that's why if you live in San Angelo and you need to go get on I-20, you're going to head west because you're going to go left. So we always use that compass rose. About how far will your family travel to reach your grandparents' city when following the trail? Wow, we're going to have to use a piece of paper so we can figure it out. Do you remember how to do we take a piece of paper and we put it at the very end of that scale. You see the scale that's 0 to 250 meters? Okay. Not meters, miles. So we're going to mark that. So here's what I did. See what I did? I put that mark there. This right here, the edge of the paper is at 0, and this was at 250. So this is the measurement that's on that scale. So let's put it down here and let's go to, it says, how far will your family travel to reach your grandparents' city if we follow that trail? So let's measure from San Angelo to Interstate 20. Okay, and then we have to go up from there. You'll have to kind of mark it. Okay, then we're going to go up from here. See, because remember we're going to Colorado Springs. Okay, so we can put the edge of our paper. Let me show you. I'm going to pull this down. I'm going to show you this. Okay, you see what I've done here? I've put the end of my paper on Colorado Springs and I'm going down the yellow line. Do you see that? I'm measuring. There's my mark. Because see, I used the scale. So that's 250 miles. That's another 250 miles, which 250 and 250 makes 500. Okay, then I'm going to measure again. Now, I've only got one hand to use, so I'm not really doing it the right way. So then you'd have to kind of curve it around. It's not going to be quite another about 250 more. So let's just take a wild guess at the numbers that they've given to us. Now I've got to fix my computer. I had to get that off there so you could see what I was doing. All right, are we ever going to get this fixed? There we go. All right, so let's see our numbers on here. It's not 3,000 miles. I'm crooked, ain't I? We don't want to be crooked. Are we good? Okay, so we know on number 3, how far? They're not going 3,000 miles because 3,000 miles is not that yellow line. But we know it's more than 500 miles because remember we measured 2 times with our measurement and it was 500 and it was a little bit more than that. So we know it's going to be 850. This is really hard for me to show you on a video, so that's why I'm not going to push the matter on it. But it's using a scale to find, my thing's crooked. I'm sorry, I'm trying to fix it for you. So it's using a scale trying to figure out how far it would be. All right, look at number 4. What interstate will your family travel on to get to your uncle and aunt's city? We're going to look back up there. It says, then you'll visit your uncle and aunt and cousins in Topeka, Kansas. All right, so from Colorado Springs to go over to Topeka, Kansas, what interstate are we going to get on? Well, from Colorado Springs, we're going to have to go north to Denver, and then we'll travel east on I-70. So it would be, I stands for interstate. So 70, number 4 would be 70, Highway 70. All right, number 5. Which trail should your family follow to travel home? Let's see. Well, we're going to be in Topeka. So if they're going to go back down to San Angelo, looks like they might need to follow the blue line, which would be the Chisholm Trail to go home. Good deal. Fill that in. Now, I don't need a picture of this one. I just did this one with you. But I would like to have the study guide page so that I can give you a grade on that. Okay? And that's all for today.